Sometimes I can get so caught up in reading titles that have been nominated for book prizes or other newly published books that I can forget there are some classic books that I really ought to have got around to reading by now. So I have created for myself a TBR pile of 8 classic books I want to read before the end of this year. Some of these books are related to other reading that I'm currently doing, or they're for book clubs that I'm involved with, or they're just books that I fancy reading and have been wanting to get around to. So I'd love to know if you have read any of these books, if you would recommend them, or if there are some other classic titles that you want to get around to reading sooner rather than later. Let me know about that in the comments below. So starting off, there is a quite short novel by Somerset Maugham, which is his very first novel, called Liza of Lambeth. Why, if it isn't Liza of Lambeth? I really shouldn't do accents. This is really horrible, sorry. I'm interested in reading this because I'm just about to read The House of Doors with my new online book club that I've started, and which if you haven't joined yet, I'll put a link below so you can find out information about it. I'm really excited to start discussing this book with the other members, and this is all about a section of the life of Willie Somerset Maugham, and following him as he's writing a story, not this book, but later in his life. So yeah, this is his very first novel. It's about a woman named Liza, who is not Liza Minnelli, but Liza of Lambeth, who's 18 years old, who's a very vivacious, popular girl. She has a man that she is kind of her beau, but then she meets another man who is married that she starts having an affair with. And so I do have this thing about reading authors. I've read some of Somerset Maugham's books before and some of his short stories, but I do like to go back and read all of their books in the order that they've read them. And Maugham was a very popular, very prolific writer. He wrote quite a lot, and it's quite interesting that this is his very first novel. And also, I live in the borough of Lambeth here in London, and so I took this out from the Lambeth Library, as you can see. So it feels very appropriate to read this book. The Black Prince by Iris Murdoch. Iris Murdoch is such a great writer. She's another author that I've been reading her books slowly over time, and this is one that I've never got to. Now, just recently, I read her novel, A Fairly Honorable Defeat. I just read this for the first time a couple of months ago, completely loved it. It reminded me why I love reading her writing. She writes about love and relationships in such a fascinating way while exploring a number of philosophical concepts. And so in The Black Prince, there's a man who's written a couple of middling type books and who feels like he hasn't had a very successful life, so he wants to sit down and write his magnum opus, but then life keeps getting in the way. People keep intruding upon his solitude and his writing time, and I'm really keen to see how she handles that. And also I really like on the inside of this, you can see there are like skulls amongst the flowers. So a number of Murdoch's books were republished in these vintage classic editions a number of years ago, which are really beautiful. Clouds Over Paris, the wartime notebooks of Felix Hartlaub, translated by Simon Beatty. So Felix Hartlaub was a German officer stationed in occupied Paris in 1940. He was there doing research for the German government. He didn't want to be involved in the war, but he had to enlist. And so while he was there in his spare time, he kept these notebooks making impressions of the people and the location in Paris under occupation. And Felix Hartlaub disappeared shortly before the end of World War II, and it's not really known what happened to him, but he left behind these notebooks with all of his impressions, and it also includes some drawings towards the end of the notebook. And I'm especially interested in this because I did just recently read the novel Prophet Song, which is about this kind of totalitarian setting and a community that's increasingly under surveillance and under lockdown as conflict increases and war starts to take over a city. And so there are little sections in this where you can see certain officers that are stationed here, and there's this like tension between this person who is fulfilling a duty and a person who is witnessing everything that is happening around them and is kind of doing this under duress. And I'm interested in reading more writing that explores that kind of tension, and this is a real life account of that. So I'm interested to see how this plays out. Another book which is exploring oppression under a totalitarian government, there is the great dystopian novel 1984 by George Orwell, which is so well known, has been so influential both in the language which was created in this book, which is now like common parlance in our cultural landscape, but also the story about living under a government under surveillance and the dangers of technology intruding upon our personal lives. And I haven't read this since I was a teenager, and so I've been talking about how I've been wanting to reread this, and I really want to get to it soon because I just received a finished copy of the new novel called Julia by Sandra Newman, which is her reinterpretation, rewriting of 1984 from the point of view of the character of Julia in George Orwell's book. And so I'm so interested to revisit Orwell's book before getting to this brand new novel, which gives a new take on Orwell's classic. I should note too that this isn't going to be published until October here in the UK, but yeah, very striking cover, and look at the insides. Virginia Woolf is one of my favorite writers, and The Waves is my favorite novel of all time. I was just rereading some sections of it recently, and I realized I've never read Virginia Woolf's novel Flush. Now, I know this is one of her more minor works. It's a fictional biography of a dog named Flush who belonged to the poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and Virginia Woolf wrote a book looking at from the point of view of Flush, observing kind of the world around this dog. And so it sounds quite like playful and whimsical, but Virginia Woolf is such a fascinating, intelligent writer. I'm so interested to see how she writes about this subject matter. And also I have this beautiful edition. So on the inside, there's kind of paw prints, and that's really cute. But there's also a picture in the very beginning of Virginia Woolf's own Cocker Spaniel called Pinka. So that's really cute too. So very keen to see what this book is like. A recently republished novel that was first published in 1930 is The Shudder of Snow by Emily Holmes Coleman. And this is a story of a woman who is suffering from postpartum depression and is put in an institution for that. So it's looking at mental health and motherhood from almost 100 years ago, and I'm so interested and slightly trepidatious, to see how this condition was handled a century ago and what that experience was like from the inside of someone who is experiencing it. I've heard such good things about this novel, and it sounds so powerful. A novel I'm going to be reading for my physical book club that I'm a part of is The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. And I'm slightly ashamed to admit I've never read anything by Le Guin before, even though she's such a classic writer of science fiction. So I'm so excited to read my very first book by her. I know this isn't one of her most famous ones. It's fairly slender, but it should be an interesting introduction to her work. And so this is about a planet of peaceful inhabitants that is invaded by bloodthirsty invaders who enslave the inhabitants of this world, and so they eventually start to rebel against the people that are holding them captive, but this involves violence. So it's about going against our peaceful nature when necessity requires us to do so, and the whole question of that. And I'm so eager to be immersed in Le Guin's imaginative world. And finally, another writer that I'm also quite ashamed to admit I've never read before is George Borges. And so his book Labyrinths, I feel like, has been so influential, is referenced so many times in bookish discussions I have and reading that I do, that I feel like it's high time I've got around to reading the great Argentinian writer who's been so influential. So this is a collection of his short stories, but also includes some essays and parables he wrote. He wrote about such powerful philosophical subjects and in such a creative way that I can't wait to finally explore his writing. So those are all of the classics that I'm hoping to get to before the end of the year. Like I said, let me know if you've read any of these books and what you think about them in the comments below, or if there are other classic books, classic authors that you've been wanting to get to and that you're hoping to read soon. I would love to hear about that. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.